Today we're going to make a maple pecan choux. It is so delicious and perfect for this late fall season, and we are going to have a bunch of different elements starting off with a maple pecan praline. I decided to use this maple sugar in addition to regular sugar and water to create the caramel that I will then pour over my toasted pecans. If you want to do a more traditional praline, if you want to do a dry caramel or a wet caramel that is water and just regular sugar, you can, or you can add in the addition of maple. So whatever you are doing, you will want to just create a nice deep amber brown caramel. Don't go too dark, but you want to make sure that this caramelizes. It is a little bit harder to tell when you are using maple sugar, so you can go by temperature too if you want to, but whenever you reach that caramel stage, pour it over the toasted pecans and then leave it to cool completely before you mix it into a praline. I always recommend toasting the nuts beforehand if you are going to toast them, and then once they come out of the oven, then start your caramel, because once the caramel is done and ready to be poured over the nuts, it needs to be used immediately. Now, technically, yes, you can separately have the caramel and the nuts and then mix them together into a praline. That is fine, but I really like to pour it over. I just really like this. It's how I was taught, and so this is the method that I prefer, though if you find something different works best in your kitchen, you can do that. Just make sure that that caramel completely cools down and hardens before you break it up and get it into your food processor. Now, I have a really small, tiny, and weak food processor, but after blending for a while, this does come together into a praline paste, and it is so delicious. If that isn't forming for you, you can add a little bit of a neutral oil like grapeseed oil to help emulsify everything together. The next element we are going to create is a maple bourbon pastry cream. This is a pretty standard pastry cream recipe. I've got milk, cream, egg yolks, cornstarch, butter, vanilla, but then I have some of that maple sugar again and a little bit of bourbon. Now, because I am making a really small batch of choux here today, I am making a very tiny amount of pastry cream. This amount of pastry cream, it's still pretty easy to do, though I would say in general, and especially if you are newer to pastry cream, making a little bit bigger sized batch is actually easier than creating a really tiny batch. Also, if you don't have the maple sugar, you can use maple syrup, but you may want to increase either the egg yolk or the cornstarch just a little bit to help that thicken up, as the maple syrup would add in extra liquid and moisture. And if you do not want to add in any alcohol, you can remove the bourbon. That is completely okay. You can leave it as a maple pastry cream, or if you want to add in another layer of flavor, you absolutely could. So first I heated up my cream, milk, and sugar, tempered that into my egg yolk and cornstarch, then transferred everything back into my saucepan, where I will whisk continuously on a pretty low heat here until this thickens up and I'm just starting to see some bubbles rising up from the bottom. Again, because this is such a small batch, it will happen very quickly, and this layer of cream is just barely coating the bottom of my saucepan, so it's a little bit harder to tell that it has reached that really nice thick sort of bubbling stage here than it would, I think, if you're making twice as much or 4 times as much the volume of this pastry cream, but this is looking really nice and glossy and thick, so I'll take it off the heat, let it cool down for just a second, and then I'm going to emulsify in my butter. Now, usually if I'm making a really large batch, or even again 2, 3, 4 times the size of this, I could probably get my immersion blender right into my pan here and emulsify in the butter immediately. Because this is a really small batch, I decided to first whisk the butter in, then I'm going to scoop all of this pastry cream out into a narrower, deeper container that I can then emulsify everything with an immersion blender at this point, and it'll be a lot easier to do with this small volume. Emulsifying this with an immersion blender is super important to get the creamiest, best texture on your pastry cream. Please do not skip that step. Then I refrigerate that until it is completely cool, so at least a few hours. One more thing, I am going to create some gold feuilletine just by taking some feuilletine flakes and adding a little bit of gold luster dust. Then the very last element right before I finish off my choux is a maple mascarpone cream. If you watched my choux cream video from a couple weeks ago, this will look a little bit familiar to you, but instead of powdered sugar, I am using maple syrup. Here it is going to be okay to use maple syrup, though if you wanted to use maple sugar, you could. I just like to whisk the maple syrup, vanilla, and mascarpone together before I add in my cream and whip this to a medium stiff peak. When I am making a really small batch like this, it is something I like to do by hand. It only takes a couple minutes to whip up. Otherwise, yes, absolutely, you can use a hand mixer or a stand mixer to do this. Just make sure that you are not whipping too much. If you whip this to a really stiff peak right away, it is going to look a little bit broken and it'll be a little bit hard to pipe. So you want this to be more of a medium stiff peak, and then you will have a really smooth texture as you pipe. I have some finished choux here, and there are two different styles I really like to do when I have about 3 different elements to add into my choux. One, you can cut off the top like we did for the choux cream in the last video, or you can go in from the bottom. Use a piping tip to just poke a hole in the bottom of your choux, and of course it's hollow inside, so then you can go in from the bottom without cutting anything and go in first with that pastry cream. Once it seems like it's almost full, then go in with the praline right into the center, and now you should have a really completely full choux. Then turn it over, and on the top add a little rosette of the cream, and then whatever you want for your topping. I added some toasted pecans and that gold feuilletine flake, and it's done. Then if you did cut the top off, you can just go in from that side, pastry cream first, then add that pecan praline, then go in with that maple mascarpone cream, and then add any toppings you want. Even though there aren't that many more steps or elements than the previous video, we did just a basic vanilla mascarpone cream and made choux cream. This choux is so decadent and fancy, and it feels like something that is incredibly technically challenging, and I'm not saying it's not. Pastry cream is something that takes a bit of practice. The pecan praline maybe takes a little bit of practice. They're not necessarily super easy things, but all together it's not crazy difficult. Some petit gâteaux, some entremets, some things, eclairs, different things can be really, really challenging to make, but I think this is a really approachable dessert, especially if you have already accomplished making the choux cream, you understand how to make pâte choux, you understand how to make that whipped mascarpone cream. This is the next level. I hope you give it a try. I really love this maple pecan flavor for fall. It is so fun. It would be great for any holiday gathering you have, so definitely let me know if you give it a try. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!